Hello everybody, this is Adam, and today we're going to go over how to actually make your first Android application. And this is going to be a really simple application, but honestly, the things that you would learn here should be very important to you in the videos to come. The first thing that we're going to talk about are Android activities. We're going to move into the different parts of an activity, and I'm also going to tell you some things that I've learned over the years of developing Android applications, which I'm hoping will be lessons learned that I can give to you so you don't make some of the same mistakes I have. So let's jump right into it by creating a new project. And I'm going to move the video over and do a screen share. So I would like you to follow along. So let's start by discussing what an activity is in Android development. And I like to think about an activity as a screen and its functionality. Now, to build a fully visible UI screen in Android, you will need to derive from the activity class that Android provides. Now, you will see some of the newer demos and tutorials using a language called Kotlin. In these videos, we're going to be using Java, but a lot of the same things that you learn here are going to apply to you, even if you do go down the Kotlin route. But there are two main parts of an activity, and the first really that you can think of is the Java file. And the Java file is really where all the logic of that activity is going to be contained. And then the second part will be the layout. So it's basically, if you're familiar with like HTML at all, or any sort of like styling of a layout, that's really what you're looking at. You're going to define like where things are going to be displayed, and you're going to define what is actually being rendered. Now the Java file we talked about can actually implement things like click handlers, which we will do in our demo here. And it will also be used for like listening to application events. So when the application starts, for example, or resumes, for example, that's where you would do that in the Java file. So I'm going to start from the very beginning here, and we're going to start by creating a new project. And just to show you, I'm on version Android Studio 3.1.4. And I've been using Android Studio for quite a long time, and these steps really are pretty much the same. So I wouldn't worry too much if you're on a newer version or an older version. These steps should really work for you. So let's just go to new project. Now, you can name this project anything that you want. And for me, I'm just going to call this like activity test. Because really what we're going to do is we're going to create a single activity, and we're going to actually run a version of the application. The domain name, and as you can see, I just did my name, and what it does is it actually creates a package of me, which is, you know, the dot extension, and then whatever the domain actually is, and then the name of the application. So whatever I put in here, you can see it changes below in the package name. So I'm going to put back in there. A couple things to note: if you are wanting to do this in Kotlin, you do need to click Kotlin, include Kotlin support. And I do think in a matter of a few years, Kotlin may be the most used language here in Android development, but it's just not there right now. So for the form factors and the minimum SDK, what I like to do, and this depends on the application that you're building, but typically I would say you want to support as many devices as you possibly can. If you have an older Android device that you are running on, such as like an Android 4.3, you are going to need to change this appropriately. And you will see here that you can scroll up here. And if I click like ice cream sandwich here, this will support 100% of devices. I actually prefer keeping it at 5.0 or later. And unless I'm specifically told by a client that I'm working with, or I'm told by some sort of requirement that I need to maintain compatibility back with 4.3, for example. And typically I don't go back before 4.3 because you can see it supports 95.9% of the devices. In this demo, We're not going to worry about the wearable, the TV, the auto, or the Android things part. We're just going to hit next here. This is a very, very cool thing that you can do here. We're not going to add an activity this way, but I would recommend that you go through the steps over and over again and try out each and every one of these. What I'm going to teach you is I'm going to start with a no activity project, and then I'm going to show you through the UI how to actually create one. And what's important about this is this will help you in the future when you need to add 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 activities to your project. So I'm going to finish here, and this one sometimes takes a little bit, and while this is actually working, I want to talk a little bit about activities as a whole. So when I first started Android development, I thought of activities as a one-off piece of functionality, but as I got more experience, I would like you to think about activities as reusable items. So you build like a login screen, for example, with login functionality, and you do it with helper classes and wrappers and facades, for example, and you make that login screen so it can legitimately be used in other applications that you build. And what do I mean by the wrappers and the facades? I mean, you're not going to be accessing directly to like your API from your activity, for example. What you'd want to do is build like service classes or facades, so you're interacting with an intermediary source, so that when you go and drop that login screen into another project, all you have to do is complete that interface, that connection that's supposed to be there. And to me, that's a really, really cool thing, and something to keep in mind as you go forward in your programming of Android going forward. So now that we're in the environment, you can see everything is up and running. I would like you to take some time and just get familiar with a few things. I'm going to start by really focusing on this left side. I'm not going to go too much into these menus up here at the top yet. But one thing that I really would recommend is notice that I have project highlighted. If I unhighlight it, you end up getting the different build variants. And we won't get into build variants, but honestly, they are super powerful, and I've used them quite a bit in production environments. So if you expand, now another thing to think about here is if I click on this project files or this Android, honestly, what I prefer working in is this project files. Some people definitely prefer working here, and I can totally see that. Other people prefer working here, where you can actually see where everything actually lives, all right? And this is our application. So notice that there is an activity test folder here, and then there is an activity or an app folder here. The activity test is where you would do like unit testing, or maybe even integration testing, depending on the type of tests that are required. But what ends up happening is you write code here, and then you can test it to make sure that it's working. So notice here that when I expand source, I've got my Android test Java and my test Java. I'm going to mainly be focused on this main folder. And again, feel free to work here as well too, but notice that in this Java folder, for example, the activity test, there is an Android test and a test one as well. So you're going to be working off of here, but I really do recommend working off of project files. So we open up this main folder here, and if we right click here, we can do new activity. And notice that we have all of these same things that were in that template helper that popped up in that screen. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just click an empty activity. And we're going to just keep it called main activity. Notice that this check here is called generate layout file. Now you can create an activity without already generated layout file. And the reason for that is you can have one layout file shared between multiple activities. And I have done that before, and it is actually very useful. But in this case, we're going to actually generate one. This is also another important checkbox. The launcher activity is the activity that launches when the application starts. So What's important about this is like if we didn't check this and we try to run our application, we wouldn't have an activity that loads initially. Again, we're going to keep this to Java just to keep it simple for us. And the backwards compatibility, where I am a big fan of just always using the backwards compatibility library. So I'm going to click finish here. This sometimes takes a few seconds, and then I'm going to show you the parts of an activity that are actually made once this finishes. Okay. So it looks like everything is loading. All right. So a few things were generated here. We're not going to dig too much into the resource folder, but if you expand the Java folder here, you can see that we now have a main activity.java file. There is this red here that it can't resolve it because it's building, but it'll go away. And you can see it went away there. So we have extended the app compat activity here. And this is actually very important because this allows us to remain backwards compatible going into the future. So you can see that we've got this set content view, our layout activity main. If you hold down the control key and you click on this, for example, it'll actually shortcut you right into that layout file. And you can see that it's loading up in this really cool view here. The two views here are the text view and the design view. Another way to get to this is it generated this activity underscore main.xml file right here in the res folder, which is resources, layout, activity main. So there's a couple different things, and I would highly recommend you playing around with all of these. The first thing that I'm going to call out here is that we have a constraint layout that is our parent view. And the constraint layout is fairly new. I believe it was introduced in Android 5 or 6. And before that, what we used to use is a lot of linear layouts and a lot of relative layouts. So I'm going to try to touch on all of that because I do feel like all of those are pretty powerful. So two different ways to work. I personally prefer working completely in the text view and then doing a little bit of previewing here. But for someone that's just getting started, it's actually quite useful. You can see here, I'm going to drag a text view right here into the middle. And you can see that I've constrained it, and it automatically did that for me. And I'm going to call this hello. All right, so you notice that we name that hello world, and we click in here. We have our text view right here. And you can see, though, that we have the absolute X of 163 dp and absolute Y of 245 dp. Now, this is why constraint layouts, in my opinion, are a little bit harder to work with, because these don't actually do anything except when you're previewing the editor. So when you were to run the application, this is exactly what you would see. So how do you do this? How do you actually get something like this centered? So we're going to start typing in constraint left, and then we're just going to put in parent. And then we're going to do constraint right. Notice it's centered there now, right? So we've got a constraint there and a constraint there. And then we're going to do constraint top. And we want top to top of parent. And we want constraint bot to bottom of parent. And now we have something that's actually centered. So we've got, if we go over here, you can see that we've got our 4 constraints here. And again, everything that I just did in text here is something that you can do here in the design tool. Me personally, I completely prefer working in the text view here and then using the tool to the right here to preview. So as you can see, there's a IntelliSense built into Android Studio that can help you find pretty much anything you want. But I went to go type in text, and then I realized it wasn't showing up. So if you look here, it's already defined. So it will contextually only show you what is actually not already defined in here. So that's actually really cool. So let's just call this Hello Coders. And let me see if we can expand this a little bit more. Maybe we can zoom in a touch. You can see it says hello coders. So let's run this. Our couple options are we can run it without the debugger, or we can run it with the debugger. So we're going to click this one, for example. And for me, I'm just going to pick my Note 5 API 25 here. I like to name mine that way. That way I know like what type of phone it is and then what API version it's running. So this might take a few minutes. So while that's actually loading for the first time, just know the emulators are a lot better than they used to be. They're not perfect still today. It's actually much quicker to run on a USB device. And when you hit run and you have your device plugged in and you have USB debugging enabled on your device, Google your specific device to determine how to turn that on. You can actually run your application right on there. So there you go. We've got our Hello Coders up and running. I'm thinking maybe when we click on it, we change the text of this to something. So I can maybe show you how to do a little bit of functionality here as well. So let's make a new function here. We're going to call this public void. And we're going to say, maybe we'll just call this on hello coders clicked. And we're going to put in a view. Alright, so this is one thing that's really cool here. Notice that it's saying that view is not defined. And you'll probably get this a lot for various things when you're trying to bring in new classes. If you hover over that, or if it actually pops that up, even if you're not over it, and hit Alt-Enter, it'll import it. And notice if I expand this now, I now have that class defined here. And I'm gonna have to do a text view, and I'm gonna do the same thing, Alt-Enter that. And we're just gonna call this one TV, and we're gonna set this equal to, and we're gonna cast to find view by ID, r.id. Remember I said everything's an ID? And we called that one hello world. And you can actually see the ID there. So what we're going to do is in this activity, which has this content, we're going to look for an element that has hello world defined. And we're going to, this will actually return a view. So if I hit Control Enter or Control Click here, you can see that it returns a view here. We are casting what's returned here to a text view. And then all we want to do is we're going to tv.setText, and we are going to type in keep coding. And again, it's not a good habit to get into to hard code strings like this, but for our demo, we're going to do that. So it is going to be yellow highlighted because it's going to tell you that you should be using the translation file, the resource file where you define all your strings. And we will get into that in a later video. So wait a minute, how do we actually set the on click here? It's relatively simple actually. So, and look at that, it's actually already figured out which one that we probably want. So I'm just gonna hit enter. And we're gonna have the Android on click and on hello coders clicked. And now if we run this again, if everything is working correctly, and we gotta wait for this to run, this bottom bar is very important to keep an eye on down here. So our Gradle build is currently running. You should see this close out here in a second and then relaunch, and then we will be able to click on this and make a change. So we're just gonna wait here. And it's installing the APK. There it goes, reset. Debugger is now attaching, and if I click it, keep coding. If I click it again, it's just going to keep setting it over and over again. It's not going to do anything different. But that's actually how you hook up like click events to pretty much anything that you want to have clickable. Anyway, to recap, activities really are the building block of Android applications. Your application could have 10s or 20s or even more activities as a whole. Now, activities can be used to house fragments, which can be like subscreens inside of an activity. And we'll get into that later on. But for now, what I would like you to do is just practice with creating one activity, play around, get comfortable with the layout, use both the design and text view. And what we're going to go over next is the different types of layouts that there are. Specifically, linear layouts. I think those are very powerful. All right, everyone. Hopefully this has been helpful. And until next time, keep coding.